this, we'll see how we do. That's okay. I don't need to get through the slides. I've seen this stuff. And you've got prints of it. Okay, this is just some language I like. You can read it later, but we are genuinely in a renaissance. We're in a multifamily boom. It's going to be one of the most exciting times for cities and multifamily housing over the next 50 years in human history. It's a really exciting time to be in multifamily housing. And some of this is a little bit repetitive, it's just some detail that we knew before. Lay out mechanical space early. You know, I think you understand this. You've got to make that decision between local and central and where the spaces go. Too many teams delay this, and so we've covered it briefly above. We're going to do more here. Centralize or localize. Locate the hot water tanks and the heat pumps. But beyond that, you don't need to get into it too much. Choose a mechanical cooling strategy. We're going to get into that in the ventilation, hot water, and cooling sections. But some initial decisions have to happen early. Then the other one, which is next chapter, is plan shading before glazing. I want to be really clear about this. At this point in time, every multifamily building needs both shading and mechanical cooling. This is not an either or. This is not a what if. I'm not going to argue with you about this. This is a fact. You need the cooling to get through the peaks, the heat domes, and you need the shading so that your cooling demand annually doesn't blow up and that you have some resilience. They're there for different reasons. You need them both. End of discussion. That's it. You just got to
Amen. Hallelujah.
So,
I'm just gonna say no.
Oh, put that on the record, and let's move on. Yeah.
no.
Yes.
The record show.
Yeah, we'll come back to it then. So, we're going to come back, and then we're into design strategies here. So now we're really into chapter 2. That was some in the book, we're going to precede chapter 3 and 4 of it. You guys all know this. I'm struggling to find the right words and graphics to put it together, and I welcome feedback on graphics especially. But we all know bays, setbacks, balcony insets, and these other regulated strategies raise housing costs in two ways. You have that extra construction labor and material, and you have the additional thermal bridging that causes you to make up for it in some other way.
Just very brief, I think maybe a box out of like a cost example. What's the cost example? You know, how much inches of insulation and what's the cost of this?
The next slide is the one we've all used for years. If you have a better one, we'll take it, but let's get there. So, count corners, cut as many feasible, eliminate step backs, avoid structural cantilevers, be strategic about articulation to the firm. This is the example probably many of you have seen in very courses. You know, 4 corners, 8 corners, 12 corners, and if it was a 1-story building in a cold temperate climate, it could be 2 extra inches of insulation. So it's that. It's not a perfect example.
Well, no, it's something like this is fine. Just add cost. So and then what so they get a feel for what it actually means.
Okay, add cost. Let me come back. Put that in.
You can also add your energy budget, because more or less nobody ever shows it, but you're spending your pie already, the same as your financial budget. I don't quite know how you...
This is early design. First, we're trying to tell the architects what to do, then we'll beat up with them when they fail. But first, on this chapter, we just start giving good advice, and then we'll come back with some of those arguments too. But I want this to be very readable to architects who care about multifamily, care about architecture. They're not idiots. They've done multifamily buildings before. We're trying to feed their better notions and starve their more dangerous notions. But it's still they're driving the ship. It's an architect who runs the building.
But I mean, if they've done the Passivhaus course, they've seen that in more detail.
Maybe
so, but reinforcing it and giving more ammo to the developer, say, you know, realizing the cost impact, right?
Yeah.
So planning departments actually dictate all of that shit.
Well,
architects just have to deliver. So it's not
that's
on-
another
No, that's part of it, but that's not always the
I totally
driver.
agree, that's another book. Okay, so form factor. You can't manage what you don't count, and so I'm urging every architect and planner to be counting form factor. We all do it in our heads as soon as somebody talks about Passivhaus, even before we see plans. If they're talking about it, we're in the form factor in our heads, right? My point is, I'm going to show this, that a 6-story building can get to 1-to-1 for form factor. Because even the best single-family house only gets to about 3-to-1, but you only get 1-to-1 if you use it. And this is the huge lever the architect has that nobody else has. You can manage form factor and circulation ratio, which is the next two we're going to talk about. This is where the architect can really make it or break it if you use it. So this is an example I've used for years. If you have a better one, please do, but I kind of, a cube. It's got 6 areas of surface and 1 area of floor, so it's 6-to-1. Could never certify as Passivhaus even if you put on gobs of insulation. As soon as you put a 2-story cube, it's 3-to-1. It's a really efficient house, This is what we're aiming for in a lot of single family and other projects. Just that addition of the extra floor. And of course, in our first example was looking from a plan view, but now we're looking from section. Now you make it 3 stories, you have 2 to 1. Your amount of installation compared to that 2-story house is quite a bit less. And as soon as you go to 6 stories, 1-to-1-ish is quite doable. And at 1-to-1, you need a buttload less insulation. And you're right, we do need a calculation for each of these. Would you add that? We can figure out a building to do it on. I've got a building in mind, maybe, Maureen. And we just have to show, like, if the architect really embraces this and grabs this idea, this is where you make the project affordable. This is a rendering. This is an actual constructed building now. It's our first multi-unit. Andrew drove through this with Pierre.
Yeah.
We battled over this building for a long time. But it is a 1-to-1 form factor, you know? On a normal infill, you know, not a huge building, it has as good a form factor as high-rises we're working on. And for that reason, at least from the form factor perspective, from the enclosure perspective, it's a great building. And it's easy to miss how easy you get off it. So these kind of look the same, but they've taken out some of the setbacks. That's a 10% form factor difference, just between those two. And it's easy to think it's not that big a deal. So I show these a lot, because we actually put them together, but just little things that you think, that's not big a deal. They add up quickly, and they start costing you more. And even on our really big projects, we never do much better than 1-to-1. So if you're getting, you know, like a good 5, 6, 7-story project, you're getting 1-to-1, you're as good as you're ever gonna get. It doesn't just go negative when you get 6 stories. Don't do this. By the way, did you know that he was 24 when he did this?
So still developing mentally.
Yeah.
Right, it's 25.
It just reminds me of a little bit. Yeah.
Find the round hole.
Okay, so then once for the architect, once you've created a building that is still beautiful and wonderful and serves all your other purposes, because we're not saying take away architectural values at all, but with the best form factor that's reasonably possible, then let's look at circulation area. And we'll probably revisit briefly, you know, the Passivhaus Institute counts the circulation area at 60%, not 100%, and that is in part to promote this thinking, and it's also traditional cultures in Germany. But our typical double loaded corridor that we do over and over here often has in the range of 13% of the floor area is wasted to circulation space. And we're considering that efficient. All of this comes courtesy of Michael Eliasson. If you don't know him, he has a great book I'm going to point you to in a minute. If you can do point access blocks where you've got a few different areas and it's maybe 1 stair each, you know, you've got the short form where all these magical things start to happen. You can get cross ventilation through these buildings. But you also way dial down the floor area. And so as you're building your ratio, all Passivhaus is the ratio between, you know, everything to floor area, 2 square meters. As that square meters of valuable space goes up and 60% space goes down, even though it's just a mathematical change, the building really starts to work. It really
Do those 2 buildings have the same number of apartments?
I don't know. Probably not.
No, okay,
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Okay.
No, it's a good example. This is the
elevators.
what's that?
Or elevators.
They have elevators, they don't have double stairways, it's single stairway, that's the issue. And usually they're limited to heights that the fire department trucks can reach. So, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 stories is fine. Nobody's doing this, at least at this point, at like 20 or 30 stories. But that's where most of our buildings are getting built. Great booklet, Michael put together for the City of Vancouver. You can Google it online, it's gonna be in the appendices. But we really wanna sort of urge architects to look at this and note that California, Oregon, and Washington have all legalized single-stair buildings up to certain heights. There's a movement here in Colorado to do it. There's people working on the Colorado State House. I don't even know what you call your state place, and in many other states, but including Colorado, there's a motion to get this legalized because it just makes multifamily buildings more efficient, more cheaper, nicer flow-through pieces. And so if it's an option where you're at, or could be an option, be an alternative solution or something, it's one to look at. And again, we have this history. So the best apartment buildings in the country are the New York Classic 6. If you want to go down a really interesting rabbit hole, start reading about these apartments and how loved they are. These were point access buildings, light on multiple sides, you know, simple design. They did all the things we kind of got away from and need to get back to some of these. And as we want to get families to want to live in apartments rather than families live in houses and people live in apartments, we need to build apartments like the Classic Sixes in every city and discover, you know, what does a mass timber Classic Six look like? It's a whole new vernacular, and it's part of why I said at the beginning of this, and I really believe it, this is a tremendously exciting time to be in multifamily architecture and development. My friend Brent is working on the Classic X6 idea, a little bit higher ceiling, but I think we're looking at for small lot buildings, you know, as we try to push forward in Vancouver. These are all his drawings. I just show these to say that these good ideas can come through in very many different sizes of projects. Okay, so architects, you've got the form factor down, you've got the circulation efficiency up in various ways, and maybe we need more detail on that. Now we have to talk about bad balconies and what we're going to do about balconies. Balconies improve life wonderfully. We all know that. We really saw that in COVID. But if they're less than 6 feet deep, or if they're on a busy road, they just turn into storage. And you can take this picture on almost every block in every city in North America. Just storage on the balconies, and the condo associations are fighting it. It becomes all this, you know, arguments back and forth. I'm proposing literal triage as architect or developer lead of these projects. If the balcony is likely to survive, we roll this balcony to the hospital, and the first assessment of the nurse is, yeah, somebody could live on this. It's 6 feet deep, it's on a quiet alley. This is a place people would hang out. Let's find a way to keep it, because it's really important to the building. If it's not gonna live, you roll it into the hospital, it's already bleeding, its guts are hanging out, just kill it right there. Don't go forward with 2 feet deep balconies that are just nightmares of thermal bridging, or they're on a super heavy freeway. Nobody's gonna want to see it. Just triage those balconies and the building will be more livable. Yes, there are issues with planning departments and other things, but I think if we push this as a way of architects to think, when they have that option, either make the balcony really goddamn good or lose it. It's worth doing. Yeah.
In Quebec, they tell me that you have to have a balcony to store your studded tires and your empty 2-4s. And if you don't have that, then what are you going to do?
If we all got to balconies as good as Montreal, I'll lie.
Just to set, work on a larger building, and when we did an analysis of switching to a simple air conditioning system that required a short run to a one-to-one air conditioning system, it was less expensive to put a balcony and drop the condensers on the balcony than it was to go to a central VRF system with all that was involved. So I don't...
That's great. And we're going to talk about mini split service VRFs if we get there, but absolutely right. You need that balcony and you could pay for it right there. Well, I'm also going to advise against VRF, period. Things like climate change. We'll come back to that. Also, don't do this. This is an actual picture of one of our recent Florida storms. Notice the water's on here, you know? It's just the balcony, because it didn't have a lot of drains, only partly overhang, in an intense storm, became a funnel. It's funneling water into the apartment. And we have a lot of balconies built like this in concrete buildings. It's just more and more happening. So we're going to work out some more specific advice. It's something we're doing with our group, but we're kind of saying, if at all possible, move the balcony deck 1 inch away from the building. So if it's overflowing, it's going to go down the cladding, not into the enclosure or into the building. It should tilt slightly outward, and there should be a robust gutter or drain. You shouldn't just figure out the balcony water is just magically going to go away to the street. You know? And there's more work needing to be done on that, but we think we're seeing more and more photos on the news of balconies that have brought tremendous amounts of water into the building. And we think that's an issue we haven't really addressed robustly enough. And it goes back to this, you know, we're going to kill our kids. And we've seen, this is from Berkeley, California, this is kind of a famous fail where, you know, the conventional wood coming through the building rots right there, because that's where all the moisture is coming and going and coming and going and coming and going. And over time, you have 5, 6 people on that thing, and boom, down it goes. So not only is it awful thermal bridging, but it's pretty unsafe practice. And as summers get hotter and winters stay just as cold, like the degradation cycle of exposed timber will be faster. So, 3 strategies we're pushing and open to feedback, but a good, better, best. Good, engineered timber cantilevers. You're putting not raw wood, but engineered timber that's mostly glue. It's going to hang together, it's going to last better over time. You only have 2 chi values per balcony, and you can see it all. It's totally visible at all times. Like if anything's happening down there, you can walk by the street and see the failure point. So we think this is probably the most affordable simple balcony solution, much better than conventional ones, both from a thermal and a durability standpoint. Hanging balconies, there's a whole library of this stuff in Europe. It's still hard to buy here, and you kind of work with PHN and others about getting balcony vendors here, but just hanging the balcony can work in a lot of ways. You're not gonna have any flooding or other problems. This one's too narrow, I want to get a picture. These are beautiful. Most of you probably saw these at Barberstadt if you're down there. Yeah, in Heidelberg. My favorite hanging balcony, because it's actually 2 in 1 simple structure. There's only 4 or 6 attachment points for the whole thing. And then best of all, standing balconies. You can do these in wood, they can be tall, they can be small, and there's different approaches to it. I love these ones, again, from Heidelberg, because they're standing balconies with storage, so you have privacy and a place to put your tires. You know, like that's kind of what a lot of people want. It feels like an inside, from the point of view of your apartment, it feels very private, but it's actually a standing balcony, no thermal bridging that matters, you know, and easy to construct. Again, this is something architects can do if they think about it and make the job easier to build, more affordable, more livable, happier for the families that are there. And then I need to work on.
Definition of like impact on our performance, like the side, the
Yeah,
side.
but then I should have an
and,
example of side elements. Yeah, we can do that.
and
Yeah,
the
you're right.
constructability, and not just the durability.
Do we have one we can share
Great.
that we called the pineapple? Because there were so many balconies on it,
Nice.
it was like an actual.
Yeah, I can see it. Thanks. Please do. Please send it. And any of you, as the stuff triggers stuff you've done, just email it to, let's say, Bronwyn and I, or Bronwyn and Ken and I for now, and we'll start a folder. Okay, not Bronwyn. Just email it to me. You have my new email address on your matchbooks. You have my new work email on your matchbooks, monte@climatebuildings.com. Just send me your ideas. I'm going to set up folders and put them in there. Okay, and then this next one, I'm looking for some language to help on, but this idea that, you know, the traditional advice, this is from the pattern language, it says wrinkle the hell out of the building. We know not to do that. That's going to be a mess. But articulation is important in good design. Pretty much every architect knows that to some degree. Sometimes municipalities require it. So how do we articulate appropriately and create beautiful buildings that suck us in all the right ways without wrinkling the hell out of the enclosure? And I think in some instances, you can separate the outermost facade from the thermal enclosure and get some benefits out of that. And if you have other examples to show, please do, but I'm just gonna show a couple here briefly, but I'm trolling for more. So any vestibule, your projects, we're doing this for a while, and you did this mostly to cheap out on doors. You could use cheaper doors inside and outside because you had this vestibule outside the project, and it was a great way to go at the time, especially because at the time you didn't have to do doors in the supply chain. This is one of my favorites. You guys probably know this project, it's near Leipzig. Beautiful sort of S shape to the whole project, right? You look at it, but in fact, the thermal enclosure is a perfect rectangle. If you walk up close, this entire thing is separate from the building, and these things here are storage areas for like the toys and stuff for the kids, the storage area there. So this outer layer with storage and the balconies is separate from the whole rest of the building. The building is a perfect rectangle. And I look at that and it's like, this is a set of Passivhaus architects, and these had done numerous projects. This was not their first school. They've done a bunch of these, and you just see they're getting it, you know, these elegant things. Yeah?
Sorry, does this mean two separate structures to actually hold up one?
Look right here, there's this heavy, this is German, so you would do it differently. But there's this heavy steel post right here, cranks out. So this structure sets on these posts outside, and the interior structure, you could pull that all off and the interior building stands up just fine. So it's a standing thing. It's maybe a little overbuilt for a kindergarten for us, but it's the concept I'm trying to talk to here. Here's another version. This is a Passivhaus, I think is in Finland or Sweden. I need to confirm that. Do you remember looking at it? Passivhaus project, seniors home, northern climate. It's had this big outside the thermal enclosure protected area in there. So people can get out and walk in winter without the snow. They can walk, they can be out there, and they actually, in the winter, they closed this up a bit, so a little bit of warming happening and the air coming into their HRVs came through the courtyard. In the summer, it opens up, blows out, and the air avoids the courtyard, so they're preheating a little bit. What were you going to say, Will?
Mike Liaison wrote another article that you should put into the appendix, which is In Praise of the Dumb Box, which is all about about simplicity. And don't forget Bronwyn and the hashtag BBB, boxy but beautiful. That should be what we
Yeah,
aim for.
yeah, if that's not already in here, I'll still do it. And same from Bryn, I'll still say calls are sexy. Bryn's.
Make sure you get the hashtag right.
If anybody has other examples of kind of creative ways that the thermal enclosure is kept fairly modest, but the building brings in these other elements.
Monty, we have design awards now,
We do.
so we gotta,
You can have
Pick up
design
the
work
litter.
for each of these things.
So maybe you challenge the architects to not articulate, but layer.
That's a nice way to say it, yeah.
Right, because we were so used to just articulate a building, that's what we did.
Yeah.
But if you can take that simple box and layer it, now you got the best of both worlds. Maybe challenge the architects to come to go that route.
most of these buildings are dumb boxes, but they're just dumb in ways that we
Different
thermally
I'm
dumb.
realizing I need to add the Vancouver
Because they're,
library to this.
I mean, they're driven by gross square area, right?
Yeah.
Typically, so they have their own tricks.
Just a couple more pieces on this, and I'm gonna keep pedaling forward. I do wanna have a discussion in the book and in the workshop on what's inside and what's outside the enclosure area. It's something that's come up on a lot of our first-time projects. This was a project that thought it would be great to take the stairs and the elevator outside to keep the building really controlled. The problem was, the elevator, in order to stay warranted, had to be at 14 degrees C or better year-round. This project was a Whistler. And so they were gonna then have to like heat the glass box to put the elevator out there. And so then it made a heck of a lot more sense to pull the elevator back in, although still leaving the stairs outside. And so sometimes things that seem like elegant solutions at the start, once you work through the mechanical bits, you're like, oh no, actually elevators can't be below these temperatures. And so working those things out helps. And then, and I'm really grateful you got into the criteria now. You had the separate memo about conditions on the floor, but a lot of first-time mixed-use projects think, you know, already the parkade is out of the building, and then they want to take the retail space out of the building, think it'll make their lives easier. And it doesn't necessarily. It's a really what-if situation. And I'm not going to go through it all now, but I would love to over here because I've dealt with this again and again, and PHI has been very responsive for years on this, going back to earlier memos that are now long lost. So it's good to have this discussion early. What's in and what's out, why? And the criteria in the criteria document are far more clear. They have several categories than they used to be, so if you haven't read it in a while, take a look.
Is that something that maybe could go back to that very first charrette idea
Yeah.
as to what is gonna be
What's in and what's out,
is
you're right,
out?
thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's gotta be back there, thank you. Yeah, great, this is awesome. Okay, here's another idea I wanna put out there for a lot of multifamily. Slightly higher ceilings. I'm not talking 14 feet. I'm talking 9, maybe 9.5. It gives you two wonderful things. One, in the hallway, you have space to do what you have to do in the hallway, rather than these hallways where, you know, only Marine can walk through these things, right? Just an extra foot is not gonna blow the thermal enclosure of the building. If your height limits can allow it, you know, without extra floors, it makes it, and of course, then once you step from that to the apartment, you feel like you have these huge high ceilings, and in a small apartment, it starts to feel light and airy. Ventilation is easy to master. The ventilation calculations get easier when you have just a little more interior volume. So I'm urging architects to think about slightly higher ceilings when it can work. You know, this is not gonna happen in our 60-story buildings, for reasons that are just financial. But if you're doing 4 to 6, and you've got the space and the height, it probably makes it easier to build and a lot more fun to live in. And then this
Well,
is
on that actually, getting back to that, what the flag in that shred is gonna be vertical or horizontal distribution?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Sir,
absolutely.
can you say that?
If it, is it gonna be horizontal or vertical mechanical distribution?
If it's centralized, yeah. That's in, I think, in one of my notes anyway. And then I love some ways to say this stronger and better. So I'm gonna take a whack at it here, but if you can improve this, tell me over the bar later. Any multifamily that is not leveraging repetition is not serious about affordability. You're just not. If you're not looking for every repetition opportunity and you call yourself affordable housing, fuck you. You're just not being serious about it. It's just true. It's just totally true. And I want to, can I say that any more stronger? Am I missing my point?
I can't say
So,
that.
What about cooling the buildings?
We'll get there.
Just
Repeat windows, you know, you save a lot of money, it's easier to put in, it's elegant.
Less
Repeat
mistakes.
wall panels, this is the smart wall. These folks make some other great walls that are local with way better body carbon than the smart wall. Repeat whole building units, this was our Bella Bella modular project. Like, anything you're repeating is making this more affordable, more workable, the ability to do second buildings, and for God's sakes, repeat buildings. Whole freaking buildings. You're not serious about affordable housing until you're repeating buildings. This is Dakota Partners in Connecticut. They're on, is that the 4th or 5th project like this now? Like, their project looks like this. You know, it's 6 of the same building, slightly knuckled differently in different ways. They worked closely with Jesse Kaplan to come up with what, and it, granted it was Fiat, but for their climate, their peace, it was the cheapest way they can think of putting together a building project. I'm not arguing for this particular building. I'm saying come up with an awesome building that works in your climate, in your development patterns, and just build the same goddamn building over and over and over again. You'll start having affordable housing. Nobody does this better than the Chinese. This is the world's largest certified Passivhaus project. There are 12 of those motherfuckers. And there's like 16 of these ones. And I wish I got a picture when we were there, but the developer was going through this and like, the cost drops every building. Even between 11 and 12, it drops a little bit. Because they keep their team together and they get better and faster at doing it as they go. They wouldn't consider doing one-offs. Why would you? Only, white people in America, Europe, one-offs, like that's idiotic. So I'm not saying we have to build like this, please, don't mistake me like that. There are some other issues, but we sure as heck could build like this, just repetition. And so I would think, and I'm urging all the way through, what opportunities do we have for repetition without making prison cells? There's still great buildings. Quickly, on this section, how are we doing? So I want to hear from the architects first, actually. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Very helpful for artists.
Great. And if there are other, from the certifiers, if there are other patterns you can see we ought to be pushing architects to be thinking about, that you can describe in this, let me know, let's add them in. These are the ones that we've been able to latch onto, but I'm really finding ways we can give architects respectful, thoughtful advice that their big brains can take in and make better. Yeah.
Not an architect, but it's not just the I think it's not just the articulation, but it's a change in material or a change in the wall section. It's not in the middle of the field that something's going wrong. It's in a transition to something else. So even if it's a plain wall, but you have 5 different wall sections happening in that wall, I think it can lead to as many problems as maybe the articulation would have.
Do you want to know the one sentence of truth that the RDH has made millions and millions on over the years? All those big buildings, you have hanging glass and you have standing glass. Guess where it leaks? Right where the hanging and standing glass do this. We've been selling that advice, my former company and my colleagues agree, we've been selling that advice over and over and over again, making millions just saying what I just said. You're right, it's where things shift that they always break down a leak. That is 100% predictable. Okay, I'm going to plow forward into ventilation. I want you to just note, and I'm open to feedback, I pushed ventilation way up here because getting this design right is so important for multifamily. I've come back to heating, cooling, hot water, and electrification down here. They're not as radical a shift for most existing multifamily, but ventilation is, so I put it right up behind the other design pieces.
Monte, you might have this in a different section, but the whole topic of kind of layout and floor plan for the actual apartments.
How is floor plan, okay. How is floor plan different for Passivhaus than it is for other multi?
It's things like the hot water runs, or the ventilation aspects,
Yeah, we have them in there a bit, but let me think on that, yeah. Let me think on that, yeah. And I really struggled, by the way, with ventilation. I was like, okay, how much do I provide basic education and then get into it, or just get into the design without explaining some context? I don't want to quite go full-on architect to talk about a rose petals, the whole context story of thing, but I do think there's some context that matters. Indoor air pollution, if you didn't already know, is cooking, cleaning candles, and now coke. That's where indoor pollution comes from, and it's worth knowing that. For a long time, that was the issue, unless you smoke it up, in which case that's your solution. Everything else aside. Outdoor air pollution. What is the number one thing? Tires. It's not smoke. It's not car exhaust. Tires do 10 times more damage to you than car exhaust. Tire particles put out an amazing amount of particles out there. All that black shit you see outside of buildings in New York is tire particles. All the stuff that comes along the freeway is tire particles. Tires enter your lungs. They cross the blood-brain barrier exactly like smoking meth. and you smoke a lot of tire particles, and it does a lot of damage. And we're just starting to understand the crazy chemicals they put in these things, some of which have been proprietary secrets until the last decade or so. Tire particles, we're all on meth if you're spending time near a freeway.
I don't know how bad it is relative to smoking meth, but
We'll have an experiment tonight.
Can I pass on that?
You did ask for it.
Someone else can we are in Colorado, but I don't know.
The Walter White.
Brake dust. That's another.
Yeah,
which
brake dust,
I wasn't aware of it
Yeah.
until recently as well.
And of course, now we've got wildfires. So the idea that the outdoor is clean and our problems with our indoor air is just not true for multifamily. If you're in a single family house out in a tree laid neighborhood, your outdoor is probably pretty good most of the time. Most multifamily outdoor air has real health problems. And I don't get over like that. Like you're gonna live 5 to 10 years less. You're gonna have higher incidence of going crazy. Like the health damage is fantastic. Let's skip over some of this, and yet your zoning bylaws are forcing you to do it. So the point I'm making is multifamily buildings need better ventilation than single-family buildings. Single-family buildings, most can still open the windows and have pretty healthy air most of the time in many, many places. Most multifamily can't.
What do you mean by better?
It's gotta be bang on, it's gotta deliver, yeah. What is the definition of better is a really good question. We touched on that earlier today, but yeah, you're right. Okay, and I think this is really important for those of you who are coming from a single family or coming up with Passivhaus dogma does not help on multifamily. For years and years, Passivhaus aficionados have gone around and like, oh, you're gonna not spend much on mechanical and you're gonna make it up on the enclosure. But a multifamily building has been 1 bathroom fan and 2 baseboards for as long as I've been alive. What the fuck is cheaper than 1 bathroom fan and 2 electric baseboards? There is nothing cheaper than that. There's no way it's gonna be. It's gonna go up a lot. And developers and architects and builders should understand we are ventilating Passivhaus buildings because that's how we stay alive, it's how we survive the future, it's health issues. We have to do it whether or not it's part of the Passivhaus standard. It's a thing we're grappling with all multifamily. The blessing of Passivhaus is that it's giving you good minimum targets to hit that'll get you there. And you don't have that in your codes at all, anywhere. So, while this idea of saving on mechanical and spending enclosures sometimes, not always, is true for single family homes, it is never, ever true for multifamily. Yes?
It's not true on single family homes.
Yeah, okay, great.
So
Let's just take it away, okay.
It isn't. We have to still put in heating, cooling, ventilation, hot water. And they're not cheaper. They're just different.
That's my experience too, but I don't have enough to say it.
They're not cheaper, they're just different.
Great, okay, so we'll change that. It's just not true. Okay. Poorly planned ventilation systems. You screw it up, it will cost you more to install, cost more to maintain, it will perform less efficiently. Like it's gonna drag down your whole project, both financially and affordability wise. And as Andrew, I think, was hinting at earlier, it's certainly true of ours, remediation of poorly planned ventilation system leads to change orders and cost overruns or complete failure to certify. It's one of those 3. No, actually, in the last few years we had buildings that's not true. But for years, every project had that to some degree. Every single one. And I'm really proud now that I think we have a few that are working, seem to be working with the box. So I want to hammer this home in this book because we've got to get the architects and developer teams on the same page and getting them real that you're going to spend money on ventilation. The good news is it's going to pay back really well. So first things first, what Andrew was saying, and I think Lois was saying about, lay out the ventilation first. Figure out what you're going to do and you lay it out. Is it going vertically? Is it horizontally? I probably need more examples on this. We can put that in there. I'm realizing I need to put more examples in.
And I think with the example, something like costed or informed by a project that's been costed, and the comparison of the cost of poorly laid out versus well laid out.
You know what? And will you add? Sorry, I just thought of this now, Brown. Add the example of the ventilation chute that Ed May did in New Jersey, and I'll know what you're talking about.
I think the idea is to put in the considerations in making the decision. So the things like you mentioned earlier, that the access to the unit, the number of penetrations to it. So those decisions might be different.
Give me 2 slides, I'm gonna get there. You're absolutely right. Hang on to that thought for 1 second. So lay it out first. That key decision of local versus central. I'll do more in the text. I think most of you here know it. I've started this chart and I would love your feedback, and this is what you were talking about. Pros of local console, and by the way, I'm calling everything an ERV. I understand some places use HRVs. I'll have a note about that in the book, but I'm just using the phrase ERV so I don't confuse the crap out of everybody. Pros, cons, you can go through this chart. Do you want to go through it now, or do most of you know this? Summary? Okay, really simple. Okay. Why I love local ERVs. The small crossroad systems have the highest efficiency, and this efficiency is the cheapest way to pass certification, anything in the building. Yeah. Small local controls reduce the aggregate flow rate of the whole building because you can manage each unit up and down, and they can go down a bit. And that improves performance. No smoke fire dampers required. In our market, smoke fire dampers are now around $3,000 a pair in the hallway. You can get an HRV for that. So it's a big cost and complication issue. And there's a lot of units to choose from, you know? It used to be just Zender, but now there's a dozen in the market that have different pros and cons that you could go out there and shop and have strong opinions about.
There really isn't.
There's two.
Yeah, Monty, it's
Yeah.
still tough.
I think every time I go, like, went to you the other day, every time I go, I see a new one.
We have two.
Two? Okay, never mind.
They're working on.
Scratch that up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even one of them we recommend.
Boy, did you open up that can.
I started when all we had was Zender. We had to beg Albert to get it there.
We were in the product third world.
Just ask, is this is independent of whether the outside air is coming in
Like this,
centrally,
moving from Europe.
just.
Just for the
location.
user. Hello! We need diagrams for what he's saying, where the outside air is coming. I'm talking every apartment is a
But
different.
it could still be
But
centralized.
we need diagrams to make, no, it would be
We have more
local.
centralized than.
Okay,
Yeah.
the cons are, it can be
No.
difficult to locate
Those are
on an
just one
outside
per
wall. And if you don't put an outside wall, you have some hiding. If you don't put an outside wall, you got
That's a different strategy.
some duct losses, and then you don't have a high efficiency unit anymore, dropping your unit. The staff has to enter the apartment to change the filter every time, after we spoke of it, after every this. And this is so fascinating to me. It's like, I work with management teams who are like, great, we have an excuse to keep going in and spying on our people's units, and others are like, we would never ever go into a person's house like without permission. We would never do that. We don't want to do that. So it's, who is this building being built for? Some small units use disposable paper filters. If you have to change 400 filters a year, and they're $30 each and they're throwaway, it starts to add up fast.
Monty, where did you go 4 times a year? Most of the manufacturers say 2 to 3, right?
What we're seeing in urban areas is they're too clogged.
They're clogged.
Yeah.
Okay, but
I'm gonna
that's
come
not
back.
necessarily.
Yeah, I've used that as a placeholder, but I have a slide coming up on it. But you're right, it can be more or less depending on what happens. And some codes require that exterior intake to be separated by 8 feet. If you have a small apartment building, and that can get tricky to do. Pros of central, they can be installed on rooftops or below ground, so they're not taking away floor space. That's a big pro. The ducts can be routed in the center of the building where the space is less valuable than it is where you've got windows for bedrooms and living rooms. Maintenance does not require inner apartments. There are fewer filters overall. Your annual maintenance and your emergency maintenance after each smoke event is way less. When combined with coils and a heat pump, they could dehumidify, which you really can't practically do locally. And the dehumidification issue is a big issue now. And realize that as our summers become warmer, they also become more humid. The two things go together.
Monte, I'm gonna tell you, they're not working.
They're not working? You
We have
dehumidify?
data from you that they're not.
Okay, let's follow up on that.
I'll
Let's follow up on
later,
that.
yeah.
Let's do that over again. That's why I wanted to have dinner with you last time. Unit efficiency of the large ERVs is typically a little less than the smaller ERVs, so you know, that could change your decision. The smoke fire dampers are required, and they take up a lot of space. Not only are they expensive, but it's a big whack of stuff. It ends up being like 1.5 meters, 2 meters this way, plus 10, 12 inches down, plus almost full width.
That does vary by jurisdiction.
Right.
I think in BC, 5 inches or less, you don't need one.
Yeah.
So depending on your strategy,
Yeah,
you might.
good. Let's add the
Yeah.
varies by jurisdiction. Again, this whole guide is trying to get people to think, but yeah, you're right. And this does need to be airtight, and the airtightness issue is hard. If you have other things, email them to me, but that's the quickie.
But I think it's important, whereas not flat out, but jurisdiction specific, we should flag it so we can look into it, basically.
Yeah, you can look at, and to get to that, there is a way to design around smoke fire dampers through where you bring your supply and return somewhat. I'm not gonna get into that. That's kind of like
Gray area?
Jedi level mechanical engineer shit, and if you don't have a Jedi mechanical engineer, don't go there.
2 bullet points to add for the slide, air tightness testing prep and ventilation commissioning, pros and
Yeah.
cons of each.
Okay, I want to move that to a construction chapter, but yes, absolutely. I've realized what I've done is I've conflated some construction and design issues in this first half, and I'm going to redo the book to construct stuff to a second
Damn.
set. But we're going to do
But
this
it
slide
shouldn't
again.
impact your
Ronald,
decision,
we're going
though.
to do this slide again with new considerations at the construction kickoff charrette.
Okay.
Central allows you to add it to a standby circuit or an emergency circuit, so in the event of a power outage, you can keep the ventilation system going, unlike if you probably did it at a single. That's a strategy.
Yeah, that's true. That's worth noting. Also worth noting is Passivhaus requirement. Passivhaus requires you have operable windows in every continuously used room.
And research probably shows that people don't often use them.
Yeah, but in emergency, you can't. They're there, and that's part of why they're there. But yeah, it's important. Okay, I'm gonna try to. I want more pictures. If you have great examples, what I'm trying to show here is like this was sort of your ideal small ERV right on outside wall. Not as ideal, but quite doable is, to put it up into a ceiling plan if your ceilings are high enough, but you're gonna suffer the heat loss through that whole outside run. If you have other really clear pictures of either small or large installs and pieces, or great examples, please send them.
And on that, I would add the efficiency of the ERV location, like the impact on effective heat recovery efficiency, and again, going back to the cost, duct runs and things like that.
And this is a modeling trick. Remind me of this. Sherman did a couple of great ones for us at RDH where we would show that moving the ERV away from the wall to like where the bathroom was, which is usually quite a ways in, changes the heat loss calculation equivalent of like 2 extra inches of insulation on the building. Which isn't to say that's the only way to make it up, but that's how big a blow it is. And then the other thing I want to say is building size is not the factor. This is small units. They really carefully design, these ventilation, this cladding that comes in and out, so they have all those ventilation intakes and outtakes in a really elegant way. The architects, brilliant team in Spain, they were thinking through everything from cladding to use local ventilation. So it was all integrated to their thinking. This, I don't know the bigger system. This has one massive
Floor by floor, isn't it?
Not the ERVs, no, there's, so there's 2 of those.
2 of those.
Yeah, so 2 of those versus like 200 of those. Now, here's the other thing I'll tell you that's come up for us. When you're looking at just first costs, this is probably cheaper. At least it has been for us.
It's,
Not case for you?
it was even.
Yeah, okay. Our projects are more mid-size, just for cost. And when you look at maintenance cost and you get the operators involved and they go through somebody walking through a car with all these filters and knocking on every door and waiting until somebody opens the door and all that stuff, this is cheaper. So if money is the driver, A, do the math yourself, look at your project, that's the advice, and I hope you get a little bit of this performance thing. But B, at least, and I'd love to hear from other teams, most of the time, economically, this is less. Probably more robust, but what I'm trying to say here is that really good buildings, some of the best buildings in our Passivhaus world have gone completely the other direction. So there is not a big consensus saying you gotta go one way or the other.
There's one thing that you have to be really careful with decentral. One learning from this kind of project is if you have the intake and outtake onto the balcony, you have to be careful that you don't cause a short circuit. It has to be far enough outside the facade that you're not.
And you gotta maintain it.
I thought there were some issues with stack effect and trying to balance those really big systems. I thought you were
No, everybody around us was saying there was going to be, but there wasn't. We used car dampers and air seal and they're fine.
There is stack effect, and professional mechanical engineers know how to deal with it. If they deal with those big buildings all the
We should be
time.
having numbers this month on what the current flows are, but the numbers, the annual utility numbers, stay consistent for both quarters.
Okay.
Monty, are you going to cover just kitchen ventilation, just generally?
Yes.
Okay.
Just generally. I'm gonna skip over this. There's a few boxes, and one of the things I'm really trying to decide, one of the strategic decisions I'm trying to figure out is when to just repeat items out of the Passivhaus standard to remind people, and when to just say seed look, because I want it side by side. So there's a few where I put it in, but I don't have a firm. Should I keep repeating the standard in bits, or should I just say no and go read the document next week? And we'll tell Brendan that in a minute.
Say, we don't use, this leads to too high flow rates in,
It does.
multi-unit.
I'll
so-
take it, thanks,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so, multifamily, thank you, you're up to the next slide, you're just diving, yes.
I just, all this ventilation and the problem where you put these units made me think that we forgot something maybe back in the design section, which is the trend you're seeing so much in Vancouver and other places to single loaded corridors, out to exterior corridors. So, you don't have these problems, do you, when you've got that single loaded corridor plan, or does that screw up form factor?
There's two issues, let's do it over a drink. I want to talk to you.
Okay.
Okay, this I do want to make in the show, and I welcome ideas about how to talk about it more clearly. A couple of you have hinted at it already. Our multifamily flow rates have gotten really high, and I just want to, in this book, talk about why, give an example, and talk about some solutions. And I welcome other solutions, looking at Lois and Andrew. So, we talk about how Passivhaus for years has kind of said keep your single family around 5 ACH. It gives you not so much drying in the winter, is in that range-ish. Multifamily rates are exploding, and this is the case we consider. We'll get a diagram for this later. If you have a 600 square foot apartment, which is normal now, either the ASH rate or the PHI rate is going to come out about the same. And if it had 8-foot ceilings, its exterior volume is 4,800 cubic feet at 80 CFM for 60 minutes, it's winter changing out. That's the minimum. That's the minimum you can do, the way we're ventilating these pieces. And it's just the way the code leads us. Now, if you had one less bathroom, if you had 9-foot ceilings, if you had a little more floor space, if you weren't so cramped in some ways, that equalizes itself really quickly. So the number one solution, if doable, is not the mechanical fix, it's back to the architectural design. Do you really need 2 bathrooms in a 600 square foot apartment? Really? Is there really any extra privacy in a space that small? In a mid-rise, small 4 to 6 story building, could you make 9-foot, 9.5-foot ceilings? Then this math starts to change.
Monte, you still have the same flow rate with that larger volume. The flow rate's what's dictating your energy loss. So even if you had a bigger volume, and the reason I know this embedded in my head is because I messed it up on Cornell. I was assuming during my drawing, my GD and my PhD stuff, that I was going to have 0.5 liter changes per hour, and we put in the flow rate 20 because the volumes are enormous. And 25 to 20,000 square feet is very different than 0.5 to 10,000 square feet. So it's the flow rates that actually dictate. So I understand what you're saying. You're coming down with that. I think it's making the floor plate bigger.
Yeah,
Not
Where you
because
can.
then you're dividing by
The floor plate bigger or losing a bathroom.
It's, yeah.
Well, I
It
mean,
used to be, I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom that's 900 square feet. It would work out fine. It's the smaller spaces and the higher number of bathrooms.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with
but
that.
I don't know if it's, that's an interesting thing about taking away a bathroom, but that's a whole other challenge, if you're faced with 2 bathrooms or standard design. There's other guidance in the detailed section of the criteria that say, okay, what do you do with small ones under 50 square meters or whatever? And so I wouldn't, the starting point isn't those standard single family home rates, but maybe that's a starting point.
And that's where I'm trying to figure out where this book goes, is that I want to start by giving architects the tools to understand the levers that cause it. Yes, we can, look, the 2 of you can fix anything that's thrown at you and make it a Passivhaus. I know this.
But just so you know, just so the team, so the 2019 ASH rate for the kink in the works, right? For multifamily.
Right.
For some reason, over 4 stories, you have to ventilate almost twice as much as under 4 stories. We don't understand why they did it. We're working with, what's it, P&L, who handles codes in the States, to actually take the rates for low-rise multifamily, apply them to high-rise so we can go back to the rates we were using before, and just make some requirements. Needs to be an ERV, needs to be a balanced ventilation system, no combustion or in the apartment. Those are the same requirements actually for low-rise, to use those lower rates. So why they chose to make
Do you have a
the
memo or
high-rise-
paper on this? We can.
I have emails into Kim, who's one of the people that we're dealing with, so we're dealing with it in Mass and we're dealing with it in New York.
So here's what I think I want to do, but I'm open to feedback. I think I want to do an appendix of this more detailed discussion, but keep the book a little simpler.
I just want people to know that that new code is not necessarily going to be in stone.
When we had a couple big buildings coming up a few years ago when I was going away to Germany for one of our conferences, And as I was leaving, I was telling Eric and Sherman, okay, just if they ask any questions about ventilation, just tell them it depends. It's always me. That's
What I would stress, which works in most jurisdictions, is this new ASHRAE revision aside, okay, you design to your local building code for sizing, but you run it at your passive house rates and you commission it that, and most building inspectors aren't going to appreciate the difference when you come to commissioning, and then make sure your passive house consultant understands what rates should we set, make agreement with the engineer, and that may end up somewhere between passive house and code they may be comfortable with, but at least you're partway there. But like,
It's gonna run a hell of a lot more efficiently.
yeah, and size the ERV so that it runs efficiently at that operational
There's
rate, not at code
Totally
rate.
agree. There's a stub of this in the draft document that's not on the slides with a Venn diagram about this. And the one thing I want to add is that you gotta have your whole team know what you're doing. It can't be like something that got pulled over somebody's head. Everybody has to know.
No, that's not the point. It's how much detail you go in, but it needs to be addressed. This is such a fundamental thing to the design, right?
Okay, we're with you. We're gonna, so Ron, this is clarifying what I was thinking already. We're gonna keep the chapter 7, we're gonna have a long appendix on options for design and changing rates, and I'm gonna get Lois to help me write it, and I'm gonna get you to review it. Okay, but the point is, you've got to estimate these rates early, because if your model came from design pH and says you have a 0.5 or 0.6 flow change, and in reality you're building a building with 1.2, you're effed. Just everything about it's going to be wrong. You're going to be the worst passhouse consultant in the world, or designer. So it has to be looked at. And if you're going to go this route that Andrew's talking about, you're going to have to bring the team, the mechanical engineer, any other consulting engineers, and the authority having jurisdiction or the code juggler all on board with a plan that makes perfect sense, but could look to some like sneaking around the law. And so you need time. You need time and communication to explain exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I do not advocate lying to anybody. I advocate taking the time to help everybody understand what you're doing, make it crystal clear, and here we go.
But we've never done that, never hidden it. It's pretty much always with the mechanical engineer. No one else thinks or cares. If the developer might be like, oh, if it's easy money or it's whatever, but it's the mechanical engineer you got to convince, basically, right?
We've had, we often have private code inspectors. They're paid for by the team, not a city inspector, who are reviewing plans and seeing some of this communication, and they're catching it. And they're, as the code inspector, they're not going to sign off until they understand. So I'm just advocating really aggressive communication so that, but if your onboard code juggler thinks they're being lied to by the team, it blows up into a problem really fast. So
okay, we've never been in that situation, so I won't comment if anyone else.
Okay. Yes, there is no hard and fast rule about filter changes. But what I want to talk about is like we're seeing urban areas 2 times is not enough. They're coming out too dirty, too clammed up. You can, if you pull them out, you can feel the fan like just exploding. The fan's been like bound for months and months. So we're starting 4 times a year, but the real advice is keep changing them and see. And if you're in a great clean location, you can get it down to once, twice a year, as you probably can in single family homes. Awesome.
No, you can't. 4
Okay.
times a year in California.
Okay, great. Here's the more concerning one though, is they should really probably change daily during smoke events. And I know that just sends people freaking out, but daily, or it depends on the degree of the smoke event, but you're gonna choke out your box. It's pretty easy to do on a big one. On locals, it might not be possible. We're talking at least one building, or we were, about when you take them out, if they can be vacuumed and set aside as like B filters, and you keep a giant box of kind of slightly used filters for the smoke event, so you could just pull it out and then use those again, and then maybe vacuum again and use those, like get by through the smoke event, and then as soon as the smoke event's out, brand new filter and restart your clock, whatever your clock is. 6 months, 4 months, 3 months, but you restart it after smoke event. This drives up the cost of filters and the cost of managing a building. We advocate 2 things around, I see. One, it's a great idea if you encourage everybody in your life to start monitoring their air quality all the time, including residents of multifamily building. These things, IKEA makes these, for God's sakes. Like, they're everywhere. And they're of lots of quality, and just bringing education into this.
What's our number, Monty, right now?
We're at 587 CO2 parts per million.
Okay.
It might be worth a vetted list. I don't know who vets it, but of decent quality CO2s. Like paying $20 for a CO2 monitor means you're probably not getting.
So
anything
we'll try a
right.
list of things. The second piece is I'm urging like the office at an apartment building to keep a couple of these around in a bag. And as people are worried about the changes, pull it out and say, this is not in your lungs. It's in the filter, because that's the other place it will go. It's here or it's in your lungs. And so spending extra money to get it here is way cheaper than the health effects of other pieces. That is the huge benefit of Passivhaus. But the entire benefit to Passivhaus goes away if you do not change those filters. The whole Passivhaus thing we're selling, comfort and safety, all this is bullshit if your filter's sitting in there like this for a year.
What about the addition of charcoal filters during wildfire season?
I don't think, I'm not an air quality expert, so let's check that. But my understanding is charcoal is not going to help you with these fine particles that you're getting in outdoor air pollution, the PM 2.5 and the PM 10. I think it will
Yeah,
help you in the kitchen with some particles, but don't take my word on that. Let's check on it. But
I
that's,
think you're right, Monty. The 2.5 is not captured into that.
I was thinking in series, I guess, with the HEPA filter.
So what we do, we had 500 parts per million in Portland during wildfires, is we rely on a MERV 13 filter on HRV, then we run inside the house a separate big room size that has both activated charcoal, which is cheap, and it has a HEPA filter. So that can bolster that, but only during those smoke events.
Right.
The rest of the time it goes up and down.
let me just say this about that, and let's move on. Bronwyn, you put a note in there. I want to find a vet, and I've already help, scientific peer-reviewed papers about some filtration and air quality management and put them in the appendices. We're living in an era where everybody has an opinion about air quality, and I am not professional enough to know what's right and wrong, so I just want to have some peer-reviewed papers, and we will refer to them, and we're going to avoid this conversation in the book with no disrespect meant to anybody, but I want the book to be based on science, not based on that we're all freaked out of air quality right now.
Briefly, any feedback on, I heard recent shot of a pre-filter, a larger pre-filter at the face of the building to spare the cores filters?
That might make sense. If you know a smoke event's coming tomorrow and you get out there and you stick it in and you come out and pull it out, if you're really managing your building actively, that could seem to make a lot of sense.
Just, we read filters on all our single family residences in California, because it just is gonna help the longevity.
Yeah,
of
why
that.
not change 20 filter instead of
Or
I don't know filter
Or
whatever.
I have to check with my MEP, what's up here, but, yeah, I'm happy.
I'm just, this is a very, Elena touched on it earlier. This is a very emerging area of building science where we do not have consensus about the data or air quality. And I'll just make a quick thing that one's going to like. You could monitor a building for CO2, you could monitor a building for humidity, you could monitor for PM, and you would have whole different run rates and different strategies, different filtrations. And each one would be right. And it's part of the confusion that's coming out of ASHRAE. You know, it's like different approaches are getting these very different numbers. And we do not have, that I'm aware of, a building science and health consensus of where we should be. So for now, let's build to the Passivhaus standard, which is way better than anything else there, and keep monitoring and talking about where it goes next. Does that make sense?
But I think you could start by saying that better air quality does not mean higher
Yeah, absolutely.
ventilation rates necessarily.
But it might mean higher than 0.5.
Yeah, but not.
Yeah. But not 2. Totally. Agree. Yeah, let's add that as a sentence. Right, totally right. Yeah. Hey, yeah.
And I'm just thinking, like, the size of these filters are not fit for purpose for the condition they're fit in. So as we start seeing these things, and the manufacturers want to hear from us, our experiences too, hey, can we have a bigger filter that we only change twice a year? That'd save me so much money. It's easy for you to build in. And always have like that feedback with the manufacturer's side as well.
Yeah.
As we move forward.
Time check, 4:15.
Yeah, thanks.
So,
Great, thank you. Okay, with you.
because I know you're working on kitchen ventilation on the same.
You know what? You can read the kitchen ventilation. Most of you know it. It's our common go-to solution is charcoal filter, simple recirc fan if you can. Intake to the ERV 4 to 6 space feetway, whatever your code is. You have continuous circulation. You're beating down some of it at the stove. It's not the best, but it's what we're doing most in kitchens. Condensing clothes dryers change the ventilation rate completely. Condensing clothes dryers are a ventilation issue. If you're going to put it in every unit, you don't want to create a 500 CFM fan. you know, it's just sucking everything out of the unit. If you're doing a laundry room, you can do otherwise. Duct sealing, I think is really important, most of you know that. Let's just invite folks to be monitored. We'll talk about that more. We'll get a list of units that make sense. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to get, in fact, that's the whole purpose of Connery Building Street, was to start pulling out actual science on some of these things that they're getting a little off the rails. Okay. Yeah.
I think it might be good to have some guidelines or at least like a note. Don't forget that actually the circulation areas and the things outside of the actual dwelling units also need to be considered.
Stairways and hallways.
And corridor pressurization should be addressed.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a big one.
You're getting that from corridor pressurization, stairways, fire exit stairways, hallways, yeah, thanks.
Like, don't forget.
Good, yep, great, you're right. Okay, I'm gonna try to get through this section because I think it's important advice I want some feedback on. We'll do the rest on the rest. So, I'm gonna say this more than once in this book. You have to have cooling and you have to have shading, and Lois can fight you later. Why? Because multifamilies are dense, more people means more cooking, more showers, also means more internal heat. We're already seeing buildings that are not Passivhaus buildings overheating because of this change in lifestyle, the smaller units, high amounts of plug loads, lack of any solar shading, and this is getting worse as the climate's changing pretty fast. Well-designed exterior shading, I think you all know this, improves comfort. Again, the argument here is that the shading helps you with your annual load and helps you manage durability. If your shade is like a shutter and you're having a windstorm with debris flying, you have a way to protect your glass. So, I mean, there's real purpose to shading. Shading is not gonna save you from the heat wave. It is not. You're not gonna survive a heat wave with shading. There's just no way. There's no scenario in which Passivhaus or anything else is gonna keep you alive if the outside night temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, which would be the math for it's 90 F. I think F is in the afternoon. Yeah, so as our nights are heating up, and they are heating up very fast, you gotta cool it. So there are two different problems, two different issues, and I'm just rejecting the idea that and I've dealt with it, building differently, we're gonna trade them off, you can't each other. I'm just not gonna have that conversation. Okay, then this little graphic, someday I want to show this to Wolfgang. How do we keep Wolfgang cool? You know, if you put the shading inside, you know, 70% of heat gets through, but a lot of designers and developers teams don't know this. You take the exact same shading, put it on the outside, only about 10% heat gets through. So the same thing, inside and outside the window is almost an order of magnitude difference. Yeah.
Another suggestion for maybe options like from the projects and experience, what are cost-effective external shading options?
Great. Good point.
That's,
So let's
there are many
so let's do this little thought experiment that I want to do with architects and oh shit, I blew it. Close your eyes and visualize Bourbon Street. You're on New Orleans, okay? You're on New Orleans. What's the cladding? What's the cladding? What's the cladding in New Orleans? Does anybody know? What's the common most cladding? Every building in New Orleans has the same cladding. Wood.
Venetian
Of course you don't know.
blind.
It's fucking Bourbon Street. You're thinking about drinking, and there's all these balconies, there's all these things you see before you notice they're all brick buildings. Okay? Because it's stuff there. Now, let's do the same thing with the architects in the room. Forget about glazing and glazing design, which is what we do first. We draw those windows first in our heads, even before the pencils or the computers. Close our eyes, visuals are built, and see only the shading. Don't see anything. Just think about the building you're working on, and just tell me about the shading. You don't have to actually do it because we're short on time, but when we do this as a workshop, we're gonna actually work this through. See only the shading. I don't want to hear about anything else, cladding, anything else. What's the shading look like? Design that before you think about windows. Come up with a palette of amazing materials and textures. Could be the show. You got really fun new materials to work with you didn't have 10 minutes ago, you know? And durable shading will help you protect from storm-tossed debris, which is becoming an annual thing. Tree bits coming in at the 4th floor, you know, that can break windows, right? So, maybe you did that exercise, what did you see? Maybe you saw classic canvas shading. Maybe you saw modern canvas lifts that pull over things. Maybe you saw things like that. Maybe you saw old school canvas that went out, you know, shaded this way. Maybe you saw the cheap vinyl pull downs. Maybe you saw vinyl pull downs that were architecturally presented in a different way. Maybe you saw Venetian blinds. These are Venetian blinds in Venice. These are the same $5 Venetian blinds we put on the inside. They just put on the outside. Guess what? With the rest, they changed it. It was $5. These are Venetian blinds made by Germans. They don't shake. They're made really robustly. You know, they have these tracks and motors, and they're going to survive the windstorm rather than just take it out for $5 and put something else on. These are raised and motored louver, you know, those screens that can come down with little buttons inside, you know, really easy to move. Maybe you saw a conventional glass facade, and the shading is actually inside the window. So you've got a treble pig window, a ventilated cavity, the shading is in there, that can open up. A little more money, but if you're looking for a certain kind of building, a great resiliency, it's a fantastic option, and all the big window companies make this now. Maybe you saw something really traditional. You saw just shutters. You saw shutters on the outside and curtains on the inside. And that gives your building a really traditional look, speaks to the neighborhood in different ways. Maybe you saw shutters that made of wood, maybe you saw shutters made of metal that gave you a contrast with the building, the rest of it. Maybe you saw sliding shutters, talk about something that prevents you from a flying log. This would be fantastic. Maybe they were made of metal, adding a hard edge. Maybe they're made of wood, adding a softer edge and look to the same building. Maybe you saw giant movable louvers that moved with the time of day to keep optimizing the shading for the high school as the whole day goes on, and creating great light inside the basement. Maybe you saw shutters that were sliders that are outside the balcony from the window, and so when you close them, you have a private balcony. You can go naked on your balcony, nobody knows. Maybe you saw sliding shutters that were just this elegant pattern. You have the whole building that changes every single day. Maybe you saw wood shutters outside the balcony that extend the line of a beautiful old Swiss house with wood, even though the inside is heavily glazed or something like that. Maybe you saw a brise-soleil that was wood outside the entire building. Maybe you saw a brise-soleil that was, you know, ceramics outside a small building. Maybe you saw a brise-soleil that was outside the piece. Curtains.